So throughout the years, there have been great rivalries throughout history. Sega versus Nintendo, Coke versus Pepsi, Digimon versus Pokemon. And that is what the topic of today's video is going to be. I'm mostly going to be discussing the animes of both of these shows, as there would be a lot to compare with both of these franchises. So I'm just going to keep it simple and compare the shows. But before we jump into the shows, I should probably give a bit of a background as to how both of these franchises came to be. So we'll start with Pokemon. As a lot of you are probably well aware, the series first started with the release of two Game Boy titles, Red and Green. That was back in February of 1996, but only in Japan though. The international release wouldn't really hit the market until 1998. And if you're in North America like me, the series was introduced with Red and Blue instead of Green. Digimon, on the other hand, has a rather different story. So let me take you back to the 90s, where Tamagotchi was one of the biggest things. Now, for those of you that don't know what a Tamagotchi was, it was a virtual pet, usually on a little keychain. And the basic idea is that you had to feed it, play with it, as well as just take care of other basic needs. Well, still a lot better than Furby. Those things still give me nightmares. But how Digimon was different is that while you could raise your Digimon companion as a pet, you could also link them up with other people that owned them, and then you could battle each other for dominance. So later on, Digimon would then get its own video game franchise with Digimon World. The first Digimon World was released in January of 1999. However, it wouldn't get an international release until 2000 and 2001 in some areas. So naturally, both had major successes on their hands, and anime adaptations were shortly following afterwards. Now, both of these animes are very long running, with Pokemon just being practically unrivaled by One Piece at this point, and Digimon having, I think, about 7 seasons at this point, each about 50-ish episodes. I haven't seen everything just yet, but I have seen a good chunk. And for both of these, I'm just going to jump into the first episode of both. I've been planning on making this video for a long time, so you'll notice that the footage may look a little different than what you're used to on this channel. So with that out of the way, let's jump right into the world of Pokemon. I think at this point, just about everybody and their mother knows about the Pokemon theme song. But there is one thing I wanted to note about it, is that there are quite a lot of differences between the American version that a lot of people know and the original Japanese version. Which I guess probably the first thing to note is that, well, over here it's known as Pokemon. Over in Japan it's known as Pocket Monsters. And so the intro kind of reflects that a little bit. I could go more into detail, but other people have made pretty in-depth videos about it already, and I just really wanted to make it as a footnote. So the first episode begins with a nod to Pokemon's roots. A battle between Gengar and Nidorino. Now, when I first saw this, this completely threw me through the loop, as my experience with the games was only Pokemon Blue, and there, the opening battle is between Gengar and Jigglypuff. We see real quick that this is no game. As the animation pans out, we see that it's a tournament. Gengar defeats the Nidorino when his trainer replaces him with Onix. We pan out again to realize that this is all a television broadcast being seen by our protagonist.
I am Ash. Ash Ketchum is a boy from Pallet Town.
Personally, I find it a little weird that both the narrator and Ash himself introduced the character. I feel like it should have been one or the other. Now that he's 10 years old, he can receive a starter Pokemon from the local expert, Professor Oak.
While living out his fantasy of being a Pokemon master, Ash's mother squashes them by saying he needs to go to bed. Ash explains that he can't sleep, so his mother puts on an instructional video of what to expect from a beginner Pokemon.
However, this is just a compromise, as after the video is done, Ash needs to go to bed.
He manages to do so, but not without dreaming about which Pokemon he will choose. During the night, his alarm clock breaks, so instead, he is awakened by the call of the Dew Trio. With this, he puts together that he has overslept and he books it right for Professor Oaks. Ash pushes his way through the crowd, where we run into Gary,
who is quite the celebrity, as the crowd in front is all there to see Gary. He is the grandson of Professor Oak, and much like Ash, has big dreams of being a Pokemon master and putting the town of Pallet on the map.
Gary, as well as his entourage, leave when Professor Oak spots Ash. At first, Oak doesn't think Ash is ready for the training, but Ash quickly convinces him. Inside, Ash sees the main 3 Pokemon have been taken. There is only one left, but Professor Oak is very hesitant to give it to Ash.
It is revealed to be a Pikachu, but before Professor Oak can warn Ash about Pikachu's temperament,
Ash gives the Pikachu a hug when it lights him up.
Shocking, isn't it?
I feel like Sean Connery is the only person that did that line justice.
Shocking. Positively shocking.
Oak then gives Ash his Pokeballs and Pokedex. However, this completes the circuit.
Outside, we see a rather sweet sight.
Ash's mother brings an entourage of her own to see Ash off properly. She even packs him all the stuff he will need on his journey. In going over the contents, Ash gets embarrassed and takes all the stuff and puts it right back inside.
While Ash is explaining how embarrassing this whole ordeal is, she looks down at the Pikachu, and she wonders why the Pokemon is not in the Pokeball, to which Ash tries his best to get the Pikachu to go into the Pokeball. However, they do not want to go.
The mother sees this as a simple game of catch. With this new angle, Ash attempts to show his closeness to Pikachu when Pikachu unleashes another shock attack against him as well as the entire entourage.
While this is going on, Professor Oak gives a word of advice. Wear rubber gloves. They will not conduct electricity, and so you will be safe.
Ash then drags the ornery Pokemon behind him. He then attempts a heart-to-heart, but this reveals Pikachu's distaste for Ash, as well as their hate for the Pokeball. Ash then unties Pikachu. They continue their belligerence when a Pidgey shows up. Ash then asks Pikachu to get it. When they run away to watch from a nearby tree,
Ash gets the message, and he attempts to capture the Pidgey himself, with very little success.
While this happens, a Rattata steals some of Ash's provisions.
With Pikachu off there laughing in the corner, Ash is now more determined than ever to catch that Pidgey. So he takes a rock and throws it at the nearest one.
However, it's actually a Spearow, which charges towards Ash. In doing so, they see the Pikachu and start attacking them. Ash attempts to help, but Pikachu lets out another Thunderbolt, hurting the Spearow.
But not enough to cause it to faint.
Instead, the Spearow calls for reinforcements, so the pair make a run for it, when Ash says that he will protect Pikachu.
Though even with this tender loyalty Ash has for Pikachu, they still leave him behind.
The Spearow descend on both of them when Ash grabs Pikachu and carries them. He then decides to take a plunge over a waterfall. After some swimming, we run into Misty, who is fishing for some Pokemon. Instead, she pulls up Ash and Pikachu. In seeing the pair, Misty is far more concerned for the health of the Pikachu.
She urges Ash to go to the local Pokemon Center to heal up the wounded Pikachu.
In getting directions, the Spearow come back.
As a subtle means of revenge, Ash takes Misty's bicycle.
The sky gets darker and the rain starts coming as the Spearow inch closer and closer to the pair. one gets right on him, which causes Ash to lose control of the bicycle, and the pair go tumbling to the ground. Ash then pleads for Pikachu to get into the Pokeball, while Ash stays on the outside, offering himself as a sacrifice to the Spearow.
Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is a very powerful moment. However, there's just something about the music at the end. I feel like it just kind of undersells the big drama that's been building up to this point. So in harnessing the power of the storm, Pikachu is able to take out all the Spearow. The bike is ruined in the process, and the pair are just laying there, simply in amazement that they are both alive. However, with this, Pikachu is finally on the side of Ash Ketchum.
As the sun comes out, they both see Poho. Ash then carries Pikachu to the next town when the narrator says this is just the beginning of an epic saga. It ends with Ash in town with the famous "To Be Continued" screen.
That's all the footage I have of Indigo League to be able to tell the show off. But I do have a fair bit more I can say about this season. So the next episode, if I remember correctly, Ash is able to make it to the Pokemon Center, and that the Pikachu is slowly starting to heal.
And if I remember correctly, Ash calls his mother saying he's about to throw in the towel when she encourages him to keep going.
Before that, though, Misty is quite ticked off that her bicycle had been destroyed. And if you've ever played any of the games, you know how many Pokédollars it takes to buy a bicycle. And so she is going to keep badgering him until she gets her restitutions. While they are both waiting for Pikachu to heal up, the place is attacked by Team Rocket. And this is one of the few times where I found them to be quite a threat. In fact, both of these Pokemon trainers have next to nothing to be able to fight them with, so they're just taking every single Pokeball they can and just throwing it at them until they finally get to a weak enough state where they can leave. And the Pikachu is slowly being revived when Team Rocket comes by and attempts a full assault on the Pokemon Center. Now, if I remember correctly, the way the next episode went down is that Ash was able to get to the Pokemon Center. As they go further along, they meet another Pokemon trainer named Brock. He is the head of one of the gyms, and in the absence of his parents, he basically had to assume the responsibilities of being a father for all his many siblings. Ash does manage to defeat Brock in a fight, but only after Pikachu accidentally enables the sprinklers, disabling Onix. With this, Brock's father mysteriously shows up and takes over his job of taking care of the kids. With this, Brock is free to be able to travel with the rest of the group. Other than that, there's a few memorable episodes. The Safari Zone. There are rich parents that lost their child at a very young age, and as such they've been spending years scouring the Safari Zone trying to find their little Tombo, I believe his name is. However, the only parents he ever knew was the Pokemon named Genghis Khan. Team Rocket attempts to steal this Genghis Khan, and in the process they almost end up killing this boy's surrogate mother. Once Team Rocket is disposed of, the two rich parents try to introduce their kid back into the life that they were from. However, this just doesn't work out, so the parents just end up living among the Genghis Khan. I do remember towards the end of the series there was another two members of Team Rocket introduced, known as Butch and Cassidy. And they were also kind of threatening until they were defeated. But for me, probably the most memorable story I can remember from Indigo League is when the group decides to board the St. Anne. Now, at first, the story doesn't seem like a whole lot, as Ash is deciding to trade with one of the passengers on board the ship, and then later decides that he wants to trade back. Everything is fine. However, there is a massive storm that strikes the ship, and the trio is stuck underwater. And there, it's really kind of a spoof on the Poseidon adventure. Luckily, the group is able to get back to the surface. However, the trainers are separated from their Pokemon. And the main reason I remember this is because there is a section where the Pokemon feel like their trainers have abandoned them, and they even start talking to each other. This is something I'd love to have seen more of, as I feel like it builds up a bit more of a personality rather than just saying their name over and over again. As such, I find Team Rocket's Meowth to be probably the most memorable Pokemon. So they end up reuniting with their Pokemon companions, only to find out that they're on an island of giant Pokemon. It is later revealed that this is just a giant amusement park that was cooked up by Giovanni, the head of Team Rocket. However, for the first little while, you think they are left to their own devices, and I love the idea that they even have to team up with Team Rocket just to survive. Other than that, I just remember there were two rather controversial episodes. The first one called the Tower of Terror. Now here it's more controversial for the title than much else, but, well, in this one, Ash ends up dead. And as such, he is able to party with all the other ghost-like Pokemons. His soul ends up reuniting with his body again, so Ash is alive and well, but still, though, it was a very interesting thing to see that Ash died. I guess that leads into another episode I remember where Gary had a Charmander which was left out in the rain for dead. This I was very much surprised at, given 4Kids' reputation for trying to censor things. Ash ends up taking this Charmander and nursing it back to health. But it's just crazy to think that not only Gary could be so cold, but the idea that it was very close to dying, because if that fire on its tail goes out, so does it. And then the other controversial episode I remember was there was this Bayside village which was being invaded by a whole bunch of Tentacruel. There's a famous scene in it where one of the Tentacruel knocks down a big building. And once again, that was also controversial given the events of the early 2000s. But honestly, the two main things I remember about that episode is the Tentacruel grab onto Meowth and then temporarily possess it to create a bit of a mouthpiece. They say what their demands are for these pesky humans that have been ruining their environment. And on top of that, there is this grandma that is a one-woman army who somehow has tanks and real guns. There was a very famous banned episode where Ash got a whole bunch of Tauros because there's a detective that points a gun at Ash. But yet they're perfectly fine with this scene. Censorship is just a really weird world, isn't it? And I get the feeling bad things would happen to me if I didn't mention the episode where Ash had to say goodbye to his Butterfree. I will admit I felt a little bit emotional during this episode, but at the same time I'm like, you have so few Pokemon and you have to say goodbye to this one? Well, I guess you'll find another one in the future, I hope. Maybe you'll get a Clefairy, which if I had my choice, Clefairy would be my personal starter. Other than that, though, I just found Indigo League to be filled with a lot of filler. Aside from the few episodes that I mentioned, there wasn't really a whole lot that stood out to me. I guess the first thing to note before diving into the fantastic world of Digimon is that the series didn't just start with an anime. It first started off with a very short movie. Now, this movie in itself has not been dubbed in its entirety. However, a section of it was used in the Digimon movie that would come out a few years later. From there, it was able to build up enough interest to be able to create an anime adaptation of its own. Now, here's one of the other fun things I want to note. So, the second Digimon movie that came out was called Our War Games. Now, the director of it would take a very similar premise and created his own movie called Summer Wars. There's a connection you might not have known, but if you have seen both You can very much see the resemblance between Diaboromon and Love Machine. Now on to the anime itself. So much like how Pokemon had some adjustments done when it was localized here in the United States, Digimon had a similar treatment. The original theme song in Japanese feels very similar to the localized version of the Pokemon theme, in the idea that it was very much a light rock. The localized version was more of like a darker sort of synth sound, which I like both in all honesty, but yeah, every time I hear Butterfly, which is the name of the original Japanese theme, it really pumps me up. However, what is different compared to Pokemon is that this particular song has not been taken out of all Digimon media. In fact, it got a bit of a reprisal when the ending of Digimon Tri, Confession, came out. With the end credits, the original Japanese voice actors sang the song in its entirety. I feel like I'm getting off track here. Let's actually jump into the anime itself.
A narrator begins showing a picture of the Earth, stating it's their home. Weather patterns have shifted dramatically.
Places that were originally hot are now cold, and places that were dry are now drowning.
This is all told to us from one of our main protagonists, Tai Kamiya. He is at summer camp, as well as a whole bunch of other kids which he introduces. Sora, who is a bit of a tomboy. Matt, who is very aloof, but yet comes off as being a little more cool because of it. You got Izzy, who really just should have gone to computer camp, as machines are really his more forte. Mimi is obsessed with the color pink as well as fashion. TK is Matt's little brother, and due to a divorce, is very protective over him. And you got Joe, who's easily frightened, but is also very reliable. After the introductions, a blizzard hits the summer camp. When the weather clears, each inspects what has happened, with Izzy wondering why he can't get a good internet connection. The rest interrupt his train of thought as an aurora forms in the sky.
An aurora? You mean Aurora Borealis?
At this time of year, at this time of day, in this part of the country, yes.
That's impossible.
While staring at the obvious steamed hams joke, little devices end up falling at the feet of each of the campers. In collecting them, this opens up a rift to another dimension. Tai is among the first to awaken, and he bumps into Koromon.
At first, Tai is understandably quite terrified by this, but then he starts to wonder, how in the world does this creature know so much about me?
Izzy then appears with Montimon.
From both of the creatures, Tai realizes that they are in the digital world. Not really knowing what this is, Tai decides to climb a tall tree and try to get an idea of what the landscape is like. However, there is nothing that is familiar whatsoever. However, he does spot a giant insect named Kawagamon.
Kawagamon gives chase to the group when Montimon shows them a safe place to hide.
After Kawagamon flies away, the familiar voice of Sora tells them that the coast is clear.
When they come out, the group is introduced to another creature named Yokomon. Another runs in, urging TK to join the group. This creature is named Tokomon. TK then runs out with Matt slowly behind him, and in his arms is another creature named Sunomon.
This meeting doesn't last very long as Joe starts screaming.
He's being pursued by Pukamon.
Joe then asks the big question, what are all these things?
We're Digimon! Digital monsters!
Now that things have started to settle down a little bit, they start to introduce each other. However, Sora looks around and notices that Mimi is nowhere to be seen.
But then off in the distance, Mimi starts screaming for help. At first, Tai figures Mimi, just like Joe, was freaking out because she doesn't recognize what the Digimon is. However, when they get there, they realize she is being pursued by Kawagamon.
Kawagamon flies away for the moment when we are introduced to Mimi's Digimon, Tanamon.
Don't have long to catch your breath as Kawagamon comes in for another pass.
With this, everybody makes a run for it until they are driven to the edge of a cliff. With no other option, the Digimon all join together and attack Kawagamon. While he goes down, the Digimon are exhausted. As each see how their Digimon are doing, Kawagamon gets up for another fight. While the Digimon are weak, they still want to protect their human partners. Just then, an amazing thing happens. The Digimon digivolve. Together, they end up setting Kawagamon on fire.
However, this is still not enough.
Kawagamon destroys the cliff that they're all standing on when everybody goes over the edge.
Talk about a cliffhanger. Ty builds up some anticipation for the next episode.
So, just when we make some pretty cool friends, we all take a plunge, never to see each other again? I don't think so. But find out for yourself next time on Digimon, Digital Monsters.
When that beautiful orchestral sound plays out the ending of the episode. So, that is the first episode of the grand epic that is Digimon. A while ago I made a bit of a summary video already explaining what happens in Season 1. I would plug that here as well, but not only does my voice sound a lot different now, but the audio equipment I used was not really the best.
From there, each digivolve one by one to their champion form, until they are strong enough to take on the ultimate evil of File Island, Devimon.
So, for those of you that are on the edge of your seat wanting to know what happens next. So, the gang all goes over the cliff. However, it is there that Gomamon calls a sea of fishes to be able to create a giant raft for the group to be able to float along safely. It is here that they see Kawagamon finally fall into the river, and there he is finally killed. Upon the shore, they all do a fair bit of inspecting, wondering where they are and how in the world they can get back home. It is there that they run into a beach lined with a whole bunch of phone booths. All of them try their best to be able to call home to their parents. However, none of these phone booths are working properly. Instead, they get very interesting responses when picking up, like, "Today's weather will be cloudy with a chance of ice cream," or one of my personal favorites, "This number exists only in your imagination. Please hang up and don't call back." However, Joe, he is adamant that he is going to get through, so he tries every single phone booth possible. However, this doesn't last very long as another Digimon named Shellmon shows up. Now, knowing how much it took to defeat that Kawagamon before, you can really get an idea about how this Shellmon is just as difficult. However, Tai is able to get Agumon to digivolve to the next level, Greymon. With this, Shellmon is defeated, and the rest of the gang are still just trying to figure out their way throughout this weird and exotic world. Along the way, they discover what their purpose is in the digital world, as well as a way to be able to get home. I could go on, but I really just want to explain the first episode of both, as well as compare and contrast it. But for me personally, as you could probably tell if you've been sub to this channel for a while, I am a much bigger fan of Digimon. The idea that the Digimon can talk as opposed to the Pokemon, which can only say their name, I feel like that creates a lot more character. Each one has very different and distinct personalities, as well as for the Digidestin themselves. And on top of that, I really appreciate that Digimon took a much darker tone. So I mentioned in one episode of Pokemon where Charmander was left out to die. Well, on the surface it would seem like Digimon is a little more safer when it comes to the idea of death, as Digimon never really die, their data just gets reconfigured into something else. However, that doesn't mean that they aren't afraid to play the death card. But I think probably the biggest things that get me in terms of death in the Digimon universe is in the final arc of the story, Mimi sets up 3 graves for some of the Digimon that she had to watch die along their adventures. And the other big thing is it's brought up that when their data gets reconfigured, Digimon are then reborn in the primary village. Well, towards the end, the primary village is destroyed, so as such, no Digimon is coming back. So if they die for real. And I appreciate Digimon 4 over Pokemon is, well, everybody likes to point to the fun meme of Pokemon where Brock has a whole thing of rice balls and he's like, these jelly donuts are fantastic. But yet in Digimon, they have chocolate-covered rice balls. And they call them as such. I think I'll just simply end it there with my perspective on Digimon. So, with that out of the way, which is your favorite? Feel free to leave a comment down below. Until next time, keep having fun.